Let's be clear about one thing. Israel broke international law, declared war on Iran with a preemptive, aggressive attack against Iran. Really, it was cowardly. It was a cowardly act, attacking people while they were sleeping in their own homes and apartments while they were with their families. These weren't just military targets alone, they included scientists, academics, and even those attempting to negotiate a nuclear deal with America. So what's the response from the so-called civilized West? Was it unanimous condemnation, calls for sanctions against Israel, calls for military intervention against Israel to enforce the peace? No, they cheered on, continued to supply Israel, the only nuclear power in the region, with weapons to bomb Iranians, and shot down any retaliatory missiles fired by Iran against Israel. They supply the very weapons to kill Iranians and then protect Israel when Iran acts in self-defense. We are then gaslit with claims that Iran is the aggressor, that Iran is at fault, that Iran needs to come back to the negotiation table, that Iran, not Israel, possesses the threat of nuclear warfare. But remember, Israel not only has nuclear weapons that it hasn't declared, not only does it prevent international bodies like the IAEA from monitoring their nuclear program, not only has Israel not signed up to the Non-Proliferation Nuclear Weapons Treaty known as the NPT, which by the way Iran has signed up to, but Israel has the Samson Doctrine, where it has a stated policy on using nuclear bombs against other countries. It has a strategy for this. All the while, we're told Israel, the West, America, Europe, they are the civilized countries, and the rest of the world, like Iran or the Muslim world, are barbaric and backwards. It gets even worse because this isn't really about preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. Netanyahu has been scaremongering about this for decades, claiming as far back as the 1990s that Iran was months or weeks or maybe a few years away from obtaining
nuclear weapons, atomic bombs.
Building the idea that the West primarily is under imminent threat from a country weeks or months away from acquiring WMDs, weapons of mass destruction. Even though just 2 months ago, the Director of National Intelligence of the US made it clear that Iran wasn't building a nuclear weapons program. In fact, Ali Khamenei passed a fatwa, a ruling forbidding the construction and the use of WMDs like nuclear weapons. But all this sounds incredibly familiar. You know, haven't we been here before? A Middle Eastern country supposedly threatening the West and Israel with WMDs. Netanyahu claiming that they are an imminent threat and that the world would be a safer place if there's a regime change. Oh yeah, that was Iraq in 2003.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The two nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran.
Not only did it result in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Muslims, but it also created a more unsafe, unstable world with the emergence of various groups like ISIS, all for the result of 20 years of invasion and occupation for America to withdraw, humiliated, leaving the country Iraq in ruins. But the Zionists were happy. They don't mind if there's hundreds of thousands of Muslims dead, a country decimated. They don't even mind if American blood is sacrificed. They don't even mind if trillions of US dollars have been spent, because this was by design. Israel believes its only ability to exist is fundamentally built upon weakening or destroying any potential threat in the region. Destroy, weaken, and ultimately control the region with the use of American help. This is why Iran's nuclear program is just a smokescreen for the real agenda the Zionists have, which is to fundamentally weaken and destroy any potential threat they face, either Zionists face, in the Middle East. By doing so, Israel is allowed to expand, continue to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. All the while, the newly weakened states either cannot challenge the Zionist entity or they actively aid the Zionists in their agenda, like MBS, Sisi, King Abdullah or MBZ. And America is perfectly happy with this. chaos, destruction, a weak and divided Muslim world will never be able to challenge American Western hegemony, not just in the region, but globally. Remember, Muslim lands have the majority of the oil and the gas in the world. They control the main global shipping and trading routes around the world and have a population of 2 billion people. Israel's actions will therefore always be supported by America if the Zionists achieve this result, i.e. helping to weaken and divide the Muslim world. But wait, what about Iran? I need to make some points about them. Iran's actions against Israel are not done to defeat Israel, which is the real threat of instability within the region. Iran's main objective is to preserve its clerical leadership. If we understand that Iran has no vision, isn't a sincere Islamic ideological state that seeks to reshape the world according to Islam, but rather it's a nationalistic entity that undertakes actions to preserve its clerical theocracy. Clerics that have benefited from this wilayat al-faqih system that was established since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. So they aren't interested in coming to the rescue of the Palestinians. With all the rhetoric, they aren't really interested in actually defeating the Zionist entity. That's never been the goal. I have a video explaining how Hezbollah and other resistance movements have been used by Iran to leverage influence in the region to help them negotiate better deals to preserve its clerical leadership. And this is a strategic mistake. It operates to respond and react, hoping not to escalate the conflict, but seeking to negotiate to continue its regime. I'm not hating on Iran. I'm not saying that they are worse or better than the other Arab regimes. I'm just explaining what I see as objectively as I can. 2 previous times that Iran sent missiles against Israel, it did so for its own interests to preserve its regime. For instance, they responded in April 2024 when the embassy was attacked in Syria, and again in October 2024 in response to Hezbollah being decapitated and Ismail Haniyeh assassinated while on Iranian soil. See, in both situations, there was limited attack against Israel, and then Iran unilaterally declared their response being over, that it was a sufficient response. Even when Qasem Soleimani was assassinated by America, the response from Iran was limited, claiming that now they had avenged the death of their general. You see, Iran faces 2 potential threats, externally from other countries and internal from a potential rebellion against clerical rule. Iran therefore attempts to present itself as a strong force for its internal population. Therefore, these retaliatory actions are attempts to project an image at home that they are a strong and capable leadership for Iran. But yet, at the same time, they attempt to limit their actions so as to keep the door for negotiation and ceasefire open to the West, to try and show it won't undermine the current global order, therefore preventing any real escalation. It's a narrow road they try and traverse, but end up going nowhere. This is like when Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, undertook limited engagement with Israel to give the impression it was doing something, garner support from the Arabs, but thought it could undertake actions that wouldn't escalate into a full-blown war with Israel. It was basically stuck in no man's land. And so Israel, on the time, preparation and place of its choosing, undertook a full-scale war against Hezbollah, decapitating its leadership and severely degrading its capabilities, forcing Hezbollah to withdraw from the south of Lebanon, either south of the Litani River. Iran literally hasn't learned anything from this. It acts rhetorically thinking it can project this strength and galvanize internal support, but allowing Israel and America to always take the initiative. And just like the attacks on Hassan Nasrallah and Hezbollah's leadership, we saw the decapitation of Iranian's leadership just last week. Severe strikes against Iranian infrastructure, including their nuclear facilities. And this shouldn't come as a surprise to Iran. The Zionists in the West consistently lie and break their own treaties, like Trump did in his first term with Iran. It's even written in their documents how they're strategizing to bring down the regime, the Iranian regime. I've already spoken about this when I did a video exposing Trump's agenda in the Middle East in the policy document written by the Heritage Foundation, which has close ties to Trump's government, called Project 2025. Many of the people who wrote these policy recommendations actually worked for Trump in his first term in office. In this document, it made it clear that the idea of placing troops on the ground in various countries, including Iran, is no longer feasible. America just simply can't afford it. They've shown to have failed whenever they've done this, whether we're talking about Vietnam, Iraq, or Afghanistan. And simply put, Americans can't stomach seeing US soldiers brought back in body bags. So they state clearly they will use airstrikes, special forces to take out leaders, severe and crippling sanctions, and try to mobilize an internal revolution against the Iranian regime. So Iran should learn the lessons from what happened to Hezbollah. And remember, when Hassan Nasrallah was assassinated, he was under the impression he was negotiating a ceasefire deal with Israel. Israel used this as an opportunity to locate and kill him, Hassan Nasrallah.
Are you saying Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire just moments before he was assassinated?
He agreed, yes.
Iran shouldn't be looking to seek an escape route, limit their strikes to reciprocating attacks, or simply wait for Israel to initiate another attack against them. Even just from a survival point of view, they need to take the initiative. I'm not arguing for this, but simply explaining what Iran could potentially do. They could use their assets, whether Houthis or Hezbollah, to their fullest extent against Israel, use their missiles to overwhelm Israel's air defenses, and target critical infrastructure, such as the 9 power plants and 5 water desalination plants in Israel. But Iran doesn't do any of that. Even when it targets Haifa's oil refinery, this was to reciprocate Israel attacking Iran's gas refinery. Iran only wants to reciprocate, leaving the door open to negotiate a ceasefire with Israel and West, thereby preserving its regime. Why would they negotiate with the very people attempting to overthrow its government and turn Iran into the chaos of what happened with Iraq? Look, there's a lot to be said on this point and these points. For instance, Israel and America claim air superiority, but that's never going to overthrow the regime. What Iran has are fortified positions, aerial drones, ballistic and hypersonic missiles that can overwhelm and decimate the small country of Israel of 9 million people. Only 7 million are Jewish, and amongst them over a quarter to a third hold dual nationality. Israel is used to fighting against stateless people, or militias at best. They're not battle-hardened people who could face a sustained aerial campaign from a state. Already we're hearing about the missile defense system depleting at a rapid rate and costing hundreds of millions to constantly keep them supplied. Similarly, we heard how Israel had moved its civilian airliners to Cyprus. They claimed this was done to protect them from being destroyed, but I sense it was to prevent Israelis themselves fleeing the country. We know already hundreds have paid thousands of dollars to flee Israel on yachts. The point is, if Iran, if it takes the initiative, at the very least would be in a stronger position than just reacting and undertaking limited actions, trying to de-escalate at every opportunity. This isn't just me saying this, but Al Jazeera Arabic quoted a former commander of the IRGC as saying, "We are still exercising self-restraint and have not employed all our capabilities so that the global order is not disrupted." So while Iran remains reactionary and limited, Israel took out its leading commanders, its nuclear scientists supposedly took out a third of the missile launchers and targeted Iranian nuclear facilities. They, Israel, are trying to collapse the country, overthrow the regime, and potentially turn it into another Iraq or Syria, what they became. What I'm saying is that Iran has the capabilities to do more, but it's still trying to appease the West and hope for a ceasefire. However, not everything is doom and gloom. If you remember, I did a video on Iran versus Israel and comparing their capabilities in winning a war. I said very clearly, to understand victory is to understand their objectives and whether they have the means to achieve that objective. Israel's objective is to collapse the regime in Iran. Iran's objective is for the regime to survive. In that sense, Israel, even if it fundamentally degrades Iranian capabilities, attacks its infrastructure, but doesn't cause the collapse of the regime, then Israel has lost in terms of not being able to meet its objectives, its war objectives. Remember, Iran went through an 8-year-long war with Iraq, not just aerial bombardment, but ground offensive, soldiers and tanks. Regimes are simply not overthrown from the air. It takes boots on the ground. In that sense, I feel Israel is starting to panic. It had hoped that decapitating the leadership with these short, sharp strikes would cause this, complete retreat from the Iranian regime and potential overthrowing. But now they're in a panic and they're hoping that America could be dragged into this war. But even with America, they aren't willing to commit ground forces. And even the famed GBU-57, known as the bunker buster bombs, which are supposedly needed to really take out Iranian nuclear facilities, well, these facilities are buried under hundreds of meters below the surface, in mountainous regions that are hard to access, with chambers that are specially reinforced with concrete that can withstand kinetic events. Whereas these bunker busters that number approximately 25 can only penetrate 50 meters below the ground. You know, remember, these facilities are hundreds of meters. The point is, they don't actually have the ability to really degrade Iranian nuclear capabilities from the air unless they put boots on the ground. And trust me, they won't do that. Some might say, well, then Iran's tactic of regime survival seems to be working. Look, America and Israel will always seek to degrade Iran and seek to overthrow the Iranian regime. How much more would the Iranians themselves accept a regime that sees its leadership being decapitated, that sees its state that's constantly under threat and attack, that's unable to take the initiative? How long will they remain patient and not seek to overthrow this regime that doesn't seem to be able to look after its own self and its own leadership? But more importantly, the Palestinians. Yes, we've forgotten about them, but they are facing a genocide. Iran should not be reacting and limiting its responses if it had the ability to inflict more damage than it is actually doing so, and in doing so would be able to effectively or more likely protect the Palestinians from a genocide. Remember, this isn't about dismantling the state of Israel for Iran, but even just putting sufficient pressure by escalating their abilities with regards to their missile capabilities against Israel. Putting that pressure, then Israel themselves would probably have to abandon their relentless bombing and starvation campaign against Gaza. Iran has the weapons. Iran has the ability to break the Iron Dome. Iran has the ability to target critical infrastructure, but they don't. They just hope Israel accepts a ceasefire and then wait around before Israel or even America manufacture another reason to attack Iran and really push for regime change. Now, just one final point I need to quickly talk about. Should we support Iran over Israel? You know, can you actually believe Muslims are actually asking this question? And can you even believe that scholars have been issuing fatwas saying that Iran is just as bad as the Zionists? I don't understand. Why on earth are we asking whether we should support Iran or not? Shouldn't our scholars be passing fatwas calling for jihad? Shouldn't they be calling for military intervention from Arab states to move against the Zionist occupiers? If the Arab and Muslim world made a real move, political, economic or military, against Israel to protect the life of the people that are facing a genocide, we don't need to talk about Iran's response. These rulers, however, haven't just acted cowardly, they've been complicit in the genocide against Muslims. The fact that Muslim rulers are using its territory and its own air force to shoot down Iranian missiles targeting Israel while allowing military aid to enter Israel, whether through the Suez Canal, UAE ports, or bypassing Arab airspace. The reality is, any right-minded Muslim would welcome a real response, even from Iran, against the Zionist occupiers. Even in this limited response by Iran, what it shows is the potential there. They've been able to break the Iron Dome. They've been able to target the oil refineries within Israel. They've been able to target even the military bases of Israel. And we've also seen this when Pakistan responded to the Indian attack. Again, limited, but still shows capability. Again, we're seeing that capability here, but it's in a limited sense. But what we can't do is engage in polemics of whether we should support Iranians over the Zionists. That's not the real discussion. The real discussion is, how do we bring about a sincere Islamic response, a unified Islamic response, a state-backed Islamic response, one that would free the Palestinians and protect them from a genocide and ethnic cleansing. That's the question. That's the discussion. That's the fatwas that we need to be seeing. Not the fatwas of, is it Iran or Israel that we should be supporting? Is it okay to be happy that Iran have sent over missiles targeting Israeli military bases? That's just You know, it doesn't make sense in my mind. Why are we not asking the questions? Where is our response? A sincere response. How do we build a real Islamic unity? Not just simply have states reacting in a nationalistic sense to maintain its own survival, but one that has a vision, that is able to take the initiative and to reshape the order, not just regionally, but also globally.